Ravenswood Manor, nestled in the rolling hills of Derbyshire, stood as a monument to centuries of aristocratic heritage. Its imposing stone facade, with towers that pierced the morning mist, concealed within its walls a woman whose heart had become as unyielding as the ancient foundation upon which her ancestral home was built. Lady Francesca Ravencourt, the Countess of Ravenswood, sat at her writing desk, her quill poised above parchment as she contemplated her reply to yet another unwelcome proposal of marriage. At 30 years of age, she had outlasted the expectations of society, which had long ago labelled her a spinster despite her title and considerable fortune. The morning light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, arranged in an elegant coiffure that emphasized her high cheekbones and clear grey eyes, eyes that rarely softened with warmth these days. Another letter from Lord Pembroke, she murmured to her lady's maid, Martha, who stood arranging flowers nearby. His third this month. The man's persistence is almost admirable, if it weren't so tedious. Perhaps, my lady, his intentions are sincere. Martha ventured cautiously. Francesca's lips thinned. His intentions toward my fortune are undoubtedly sincere. As for me, she set down her quill with deliberate care. Men desire either my title or my wealth. Love, Martha, is a convenient fiction that merely disguises ambition. This belief had served Francesca well for nearly a decade. Since her father's death and her inheritance of the Countess title in her own right, rare but stipulated in an ancient family decree, she had endured a parade of suitors drawn to her status. Each disappointment, each uncovered scheme, had reinforced her conviction that true affection was merely a mask for calculation. Martha knew better than to argue. The Countess's reputation for dismissing suitors had spread throughout the county, earning her nicknames in London society papers that ranged from the Marble Countess to Ravencourt's Fortress. Few knew the wounds that had created such formidable walls around her heart, the betrothal at 19 that had ended in public humiliation when her fiancé had been discovered in the arms of another woman after learning that Francesca's fortune came with stricter conditions than he had anticipated. As Francesca moved to the window, the estate spread before her in the spring sunshine, manicured lawns, formal gardens, and beyond them, the wilder woodlands that marked the boundary of her property. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted unfamiliar movement near the rose garden, a tall figure she didn't recognize, working alongside old Mr. Simmons, her head gardener. "Who is that with Simmons?" she asked, more to herself than to Martha. "Oh, that would be the new under-gardener, my lady. Mr. Simmons hired him yesterday. The estate manager approved it, what with the preparations for the midsummer garden party requiring extra hands." Francesca watched as the man straightened, revealing broad shoulders and a grace of movement that seemed incongruous for someone in laborious clothing. Even from this distance, there was something compelling about his presence. "I wasn't informed," she said, her tone cooler than intended. "Remind the estate manager that all hiring decisions require my final approval." "Yes, my lady," Martha replied, a slight furrow appearing between her brows at her mistress's sudden interest in garden staffing matters. Later that afternoon, Francesca found herself drawn to the rose garden during her daily walk. She told herself it was merely to inspect the progress of the preparations for her annual garden party, an event she hosted reluctantly but maintained as a matter of tradition. The real reason, however, tugged at the edges of her consciousness, a curiosity she refused to acknowledge. The new gardener was alone, carefully pruning a climbing rose that had begun to overtake one corner of the stone wall. His back was turned to her, but she could see the precise, knowledgeable way his hands moved among the thorny branches. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and his shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms browned by the sun. "You've cut back the gloire de Dijon too severely," she said by way of greeting, her voice carrying the authority that came naturally to her position. The man turned, and Francesca felt an unexpected jolt as their eyes met. His were a startling shade of green, intelligent and direct in a face that might have belonged to a classical statue, strong jaw, straight nose, and a mouth that curved easily into a smile that contained not a trace of subservience. "Not at all, my lady," he replied, his voice cultured and confident. "The severe pruning will encourage stronger blooms by midsummer. The Gloire de Dijon is resilient, it responds well to a firm hand." His knowledge surprised her, as did his manner of speaking, educated, with a hint of an accent she couldn't place. He was clearly no ordinary labourer. "You seem well versed in horticulture for a gardener's assistant," she observed, her tone deliberately cool. "I've had the privilege of studying many gardens, both here and abroad," he answered, setting down his pruning shears and giving her his full attention. "Mr. Simmons has been kind enough to recognize my experience." "And your name?" she asked, feeling oddly as if she were the one being assessed rather than the other way around. "Edward Valerian, my lady." He bowed slightly, the gesture graceful but containing none of the obsequiousness she was accustomed to from the household staff. "Well, Mr. Valerian, I shall expect to see results from your expertise." She turned to leave, then paused. "The Bourbon roses near the eastern terrace need attention. Their situation is too shaded." "Indeed, they're suffering for it," he agreed. "I've already suggested to Mr. Simmons that they might be relocated to the southern slope." "With your permission, of course." Francesca nodded curtly, unsettled by his composure. "See to it, then." As she walked away, she could feel his gaze following her, and she resisted the urge to look back. For the first time in years, she felt a strange stirring of, what? Not interest, surely. Merely curiosity about an unusual servant. Nothing more. But that night, as she sat in her library reviewing estate accounts, her mind kept returning to the gardener's unusual manner and the intelligent assessment in his green eyes. There was something about him that didn't align with his position, something that piqued her interest in a way she found both irritating and intriguing. The following week brought unexpected news that temporarily pushed thoughts of the enigmatic gardener from Francesca's mind. Her cousin and nearest male relative, Sir Walter Ravencourt, arrived unannounced, bringing with him a copy of the London Gazette. "Have you seen this?" he demanded without preamble, tossing the paper onto her desk. Walter was a portly man in his 40s whose perpetual financial difficulties had made him eagerly anticipate the day when Francesca might die without issue, allowing him to inherit Havenswood. Francesca glanced at the paper, and her blood ran cold. There, in black and white, was a malicious piece of speculation about the Countess of Havenswood's unnatural solitude and questionable management of her estate. The article insinuated that a woman alone could not possibly maintain such holdings properly and suggested that certain concerned parties were considering legal means to challenge her control. "This is absurd," she said, her voice steady despite the fury and fear churning within her. "Havenswood's accounts are immaculate. The estate prospers under my management." Walter's small eyes gleamed. Of course. But you know how society feeds on such rumors. There's talk in London that without a husband, your position becomes increasingly precarious." "My position is secured by law and by birthright," Francesca replied coldly. "The entailment clearly states, entailments can be challenged, cousin," Walter interrupted, settling himself uninvited into a chair. "Particularly when a woman is involved. Had you accepted any of your many suitors, this would not be an issue." Francesca's hands clenched in her lap. "I see. And I suppose you've come to offer your protection from this manufactured scandal." Walter had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I merely thought you should be aware. These rumors, once started, have a way of growing. The suggestion that a woman of your standing remains unmarried raises questions." After Walter departed, Francesca stood at her window, watching as twilight descended over the gardens. The Gazette's insinuations were a veiled threat. She recognized the hand of Lord Harrington, a distant connection who had once proposed marriage and been summarily rejected. His influence in parliamentary circles made him a dangerous enemy. The law might protect her rights as a rare female holder of a title in her own right, but society's judgment could be more damaging. If enough doubt were cast on her ability to manage Ravenswood alone, if enough questions were raised about why she remained unmarried at her age, the pressure might become unbearable. Lost in these troubled thoughts, she barely noticed the figure moving among the darkening garden paths until he stopped and looked up directly at her window. Edward Valerian. Even in the fading light, she could sense the intensity of his gaze. He bowed slightly when he saw her watching, then continued on his way, a shadow moving with purpose through her domain. Oddly, that brief moment of connection steadied her. Ravenswood was hers. She would protect it, as generations of Ravencourts had done before her. The next morning, Francesca decided to inspect the estate more thoroughly than usual. If there were to be challenges to her management, she would ensure every aspect of Ravenswood was beyond reproach. Her path eventually led her to the greenhouse, where she was surprised to find Edward Valerian alone, carefully tending to seedlings. "Mr. Valerian," she acknowledged, her tone formal. "I didn't expect to find you here." He straightened, those remarkable green eyes meeting hers directly again. "Mr. Simmons has entrusted me with the more delicate propagation work. These particular specimens require careful attention." Francesca moved closer, genuinely interested despite herself. The seedlings were arranged in neat rows, each labeled in a precise hand. "Rare varieties?" she asked, noting names she didn't recognize. "Some are," he replied, his voice warming with evident passion. "This one," he indicated a tiny seedling, "is a rose variant I've been developing. If successful, it will bloom in a shade of blue previously unseen." "Blue roses are impossible," Francesca stated flatly. Edward smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Many things are deemed impossible until someone achieves them, my lady." The comment, delivered without pretension, struck Francesca with unexpected force. When had she begun to limit herself to what others deemed possible? "You speak as if you've had formal training in botany," she observed, studying him with new interest. A shadow crossed his features briefly. "I've had opportunities to study, yes. Life sometimes takes unexpected turns, but knowledge, once gained, remains useful in any circumstance." There was a story there, one that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. Before she could inquire further, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Simmons, who seemed startled to find his employer in the greenhouse. "My lady!" "I didn't expect, that is there something you needed?" the old gardener stammered. "I'm merely inspecting the preparations for the garden party, Simmons." Mr. Valerian was explaining his work with these seedlings. "Yes, my lady." "He's quite knowledgeable, is Mr. Valerian. A blessing to have him, especially with my joints troubling me so." As she departed the greenhouse, Francesca found herself reflecting on Edward Valerian's enigmatic background. A gardener with the speech and bearing of a gentleman, working with the expertise of a trained botanist, it was a puzzle that distracted her pleasantly from her more pressing concerns. The midsummer garden party approached rapidly, bringing with it increased pressures. Francesca had expanded the guest list this year, determined to demonstrate that far from being a recluse, she was fully engaged with society. If there were to be whispers about her management of Ravenswood, she would ensure her neighbors and influential connections saw firsthand the estate's prosperity. The day before the event, disaster struck. A violent summer storm descended without warning, lashing the gardens with rain and wind. Francesca watched from the safety of the manor as her carefully planned setting was battered by nature's fury. When the storm finally passed, she ventured out to assess the damage. The sight that greeted her was devastating: flower beds destroyed, branches torn from trees, decorations for the party scattered across the grounds. In the midst of this chaos stood Edward Valerian, already directing a team of servants in emergency repairs. "My lady," he acknowledged her, his clothes soaked and muddy. "The damage looks worse than it is. With your permission, I've taken the liberty of organizing recovery efforts." For once, Francesca felt at a loss. "The party is tomorrow. It's impossible to restore everything in time." "Not impossible," he replied with quiet confidence. "Different, perhaps, but not ruined. If you'll trust me, I believe we can create something memorable from this." Trust. Such a simple word, yet one that had become foreign to her. For a moment, she hesitated on the precipice of a decision that felt strangely significant. "Very well, Mr. Valerian," she finally said. "I place the gardens in your hands." His smile then, warm, genuine, touched with something that might have been admiration, caused an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Through the night and into the early morning, Edward worked tirelessly. Francesca found herself joining the efforts, discarding propriety to work alongside her staff. Under Edward's direction, damaged areas were transformed, fallen branches became rustic archways, scattered petals were gathered to create natural pathways, and what couldn't be saved was artfully concealed. As dawn broke on the day of the party, Francesca stood beside Edward, surveying their work. The gardens had been transformed into something wilder, more natural, yet strangely more beautiful than their previous formal perfection. "It's not what I planned," she admitted, "but there's something rather wonderful about it." Edward's gaze, when it met hers, held a warmth that seemed to reach past her carefully maintained defenses. "Sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from disaster, my lady. Nature has its own wisdom, if we're humble enough to see it." The garden party proved to be an unexpected triumph. Guests marveled at the innovative arrangements, praising Francesca's creativity and vision. The natural garden approach was declared the newest fashion, and several visitors requested permission to send their gardeners to Havenswood to learn the technique. Lord Harrington himself was present, his thin face pinched with disappointment as he witnessed Francesca's social success. "Quite a recovery from the storm, Lady Ravencourt," he commented. "One might almost think you arranged the weather itself for dramatic effect." "Hardly, my lord," she replied smoothly. "But adversity often reveals unexpected strengths." As the evening drew to a close, Francesca found herself seeking out Edward, who had remained discreetly in the background throughout the event. She discovered him in a quiet corner of the garden, observing the departing guests. "You've saved more than a garden party, Mr. Valerian," she said, approaching him with a glass of champagne in each hand. She offered one to him, a startling breach of protocol that surprised them both. He accepted it with a slight bow. "I merely helped reveal what was already there, my lady." "Nevertheless," she continued, feeling strangely nervous, "I find myself in your debt. I'm curious. You are clearly educated, knowledgeable, not what one expects in an undergardener." Edward was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "Perhaps someday I'll share that story," he finally said. "But not tonight. Tonight belongs to your triumph." Their glasses clinked gently together, and in that small, shared moment, Francesca felt something within her shift, a hairline crack in the walls she had built around her heart. The weeks following the garden party brought an unexpected peace to Francesca. The threatened scandal in the Gazette seemed to have been neutralized by her social success, and she found herself spending more time in the gardens, ostensibly overseeing improvements but increasingly drawn to conversations with her unusual gardener. Edward Valerian revealed himself to be widely read, with knowledge that extended far beyond horticulture. He spoke of art, literature, and politics with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to intellectual discourse. Yet he never overstepped the boundaries of his position, maintaining a respectful distance that Francesca found herself increasingly wishing to breach. One afternoon, she found him sketching in a small notebook, seated beneath an oak tree during what must have been his brief rest period. "You draw as well?" she asked, approaching quietly. He closed the notebook quickly, but not before she glimpsed a detailed rendering of Havenswood Manor. "A hobby merely, my lady. I find it helps me visualize garden designs." "May I see?" she requested, extending her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he surrendered the notebook. Francesca turned the pages slowly, increasingly astonished by what she found. These were not simple sketches but works of considerable artistic merit, detailed architectural drawings of Havenswood from various angles, studies of the gardens, and, most surprisingly, a portrait. Her own face looked back at her from the page, captured in a moment of unguarded thought. The artist had seen something in her that few others had, a vulnerability beneath her composed exterior, a loneliness that she worked diligently to conceal. "This is how you see me?" she asked quietly, her finger hovering over the portrait. Edward's expression was serious when he answered. "I draw what I observe, my lady." "And you observe quite deeply, it seems." She returned the notebook, suddenly feeling exposed. "These are the work of a trained artist, Mr. Valerian. Like your knowledge of botany, it suggests a background somewhat at odds with your current position." "We all have our stories," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Some are more complicated than others." Before she could press further, Martha appeared, hurrying across the lawn with an urgent expression. "My lady! A gentleman has arrived, Lord Pembroke. He insists on seeing you immediately." Francesca sighed, reluctantly turning away from Edward. "Duty calls, it seems. Your talent is remarkable, Mr. Valerian. Perhaps one day you'll trust me with the story behind it." The look that passed between them lingered in her mind as she returned to the house, a connection that felt increasingly significant. Lord Pembroke's visit proved to be more troubling than anticipated. The persistent suitor had come with information that he presented as concern for her welfare. "My dear Lady Ravencourt," he said, his thin face assuming an expression of grave concern, "I feel it my duty to inform you that you may be harboring a deception beneath your roof." Francesca's patience was already thin. "Speak plainly, Lord Pembroke. What deception?" "Your new gardener. I recognized him at your garden party, though he has changed considerably since last we met. That man is not simply a gardener. He is Edward Valerian, the disinherited younger son of the Earl of Mount Haven." The revelation struck Francesca with unexpected force. "Edward, a nobleman's son?" "You must be mistaken," she said, though doubt crept into her voice. "There is no mistake," Pembroke insisted. "Valerian was once considered a promising botanist and artist. He exhibited his work in London several years ago. Then came the scandal. He opposed his father on some political matter, publicly humiliating the Earl. He was cut off without a penny and disappeared from society. His employing himself as a common labourer is precisely the sort of dramatic gesture he was known for." The information aligned too perfectly with what she had observed of Edward's talents and bearing to be dismissed. Yet Francesca felt a surge of defensive anger at Pembroke's smug revelation. "And you consider this information worthy of a special journey?" she asked coldly. "A man seeking honest employment, whatever his background, hardly constitutes a threat to my household." Pembroke's expression soured. "I merely thought you should know the true nature of those in your employ. A man who would deceive you about his identity, Has he claimed to be anything other than what he is?" Francesca interrupted. "Has he sought advantages beyond his station?" "No. He has worked diligently and contributed significantly to Ravenswood." After Pembroke's departure, Francesca paced her study, her mind in turmoil. She felt betrayed by Edward's concealment of his true background, yet simultaneously defensive of his right to privacy. More disturbing was her emotional response to the revelation, a sense of personal disappointment that he hadn't trusted her with his story. When had his opinion, his trust, become important to her? That evening, she sent word requesting Edward's presence in the library, a formal summons that would make clear this was not a casual garden conversation. When he arrived, he stood before her with the same quiet dignity he always displayed, though she detected tension in his bearing. "Lord Pembroke paid me a visit today," she began without preamble. "He shared some interesting information about you, Mr. Valerian. Or perhaps I should say, Mr. Edward Valerian, son of the Earl of Mount Haven." Edward's expression remained composed, though a muscle tightened in his jaw. "Former son," he corrected quietly. "My father made it quite clear that I am no longer acknowledged as such. Yet you felt no need to share this information with me when accepting employment here." "Would you have hired me had you known?" he countered. "An aristocrat's disgraced son, with no references beyond his own hands and mind? I needed the work, my lady. And Ravenswood needed someone who understood its gardens." The simple truth of this statement deflated some of Francesca's indignation. What was the nature of this disgrace? Pembroke was vague about details. Edward's gaze met hers directly. "I opposed my father's support for legislation that would have dispossessed hundreds of tenant farmers to make way for more profitable ventures. When private arguments failed, I spoke publicly against him. For this breach of family loyalty, I was cast out." His eyes challenged her to judge him. "I chose principle over privilege, my lady. I would make the same choice again." Francesca found herself startled by the parallel to her own situation, both of them facing society's judgment for choosing an unconventional path. She had rejected marriage to maintain her independence, he had sacrificed position to maintain his integrity. "Why gardening?" she asked, her tone softening. "With your education and talents, surely there were other options." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Gardens have always been my passion. There's an honesty in coaxing life from the earth that I find redemptive. What one plants, one tends. What one tends, flourishes. The results are earned, not inherited." Something shifted within Francesca then, a recognition of kinship with this man that transcended their different positions. They had both, in their ways, rejected the predetermined paths society had laid before them. "I do not appreciate deception, Mr. Valerian," she said finally. "However, I understand your reasons. Your work at Ravenswood speaks for itself. Your position here is secure if you wish to maintain it." Relief visibly passed over his features. "Thank you, my lady. I have found more peace here than I had thought possible." As he turned to leave, Francesca found herself speaking again, driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand. "Edward," she said, using his given name for the first time. "Would you show me how to create a blue rose? Impossible things have a certain appeal to me these days." His smile then was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "It would be my privilege." Francesca. The use of her name, without title or formality, should have shocked her. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something true. The summer deepened into a golden August, and with it grew a companionship between Francesca and Edward that defied conventional boundaries. Their horticultural project, the pursuit of the blue rose, provided the pretext for hours spent together in the greenhouse, their conversations ranging far beyond gardening. For the first time in years, Francesca found herself sharing thoughts she had kept private, her fears about maintaining Havenswood, her frustration with society's expectations, her loneliness disguised as independence. Edward listened without judgment, offering insights that challenged her without dismissing her concerns. "The isolation you've created protects you," he observed one afternoon as they carefully grafted rose stems, "but at what cost? You've built walls so high that they keep out pain, but also joy. And you've rejected your birthright entirely," she countered, though without heat. "Is that not a different kind of wall?" He considered this, his hands never pausing in their precise work. "Perhaps. But I'd rather build something new from honest labor than preserve something hollow through compromise." Such exchanges became the framework of a deepening connection that neither acknowledged openly but both increasingly relied upon. Francesca found herself seeking Edward's company with invented pretexts, while he extended his working hours in the gardens nearest the house. The staff noticed, of course. Whispers circulated below stairs about the Countess and her unusual interest in horticulture. Martha observed her mistress's brightened mood with silent approval but growing concern about potential consequences. These consequences arrived in the form of Lady Augusta Pemberton, Francesca's maternal aunt and self-appointed guardian of family propriety. The formidable dowager descended upon Havenswood with a rustle of black silk and an arsenal of disapproval. "I've heard disturbing reports, Francesca," she announced after barely completing the social niceties. "You are seen daily in the company of a gardener." "A gardener?" "Even accounting for your eccentric ways, this behavior crosses boundaries of propriety that cannot be ignored." Francesca maintained her composure with effort. "Mr. Valerian is assisting me with a special botanical project, Aunt. There is nothing improper in our association." Lady Augusta's shrewd eyes narrowed. "A man of his background working as your gardener is itself a curiosity that has set tongues wagging. Lord Pembroke has been most concerned." "Lord Pembroke should attend to his own affairs," Francesca replied sharply. "Edward Valerian's presence at Havenswood is entirely proper and professional." "Edward, is it?" her aunt pounced. "Not a Mr. Valerian?" "My dear, you may not care for society's opinion, but consider your position. The Ravencourt name has stood unblemished for generations. Would you tarnish it for the sake of a disgraced aristocrat playing at being a laborer?" The accusation struck a vulnerable place in Francesca's heart. The Ravencourt legacy was her sacred trust, her inheritance, her responsibility. She had always believed that maintaining her independence served that legacy. Now she was being told that the connection that had brought her more happiness than she had known in years threatened everything she was duty-bound to protect. "I think you misunderstand the situation entirely," she said coldly, though doubt had begun to creep into her thoughts. "Do I? Then prove it. The Harrington Ball is next week. Attend as befits your station. Show society that you remain the Countess of Havenswood, not some lovesick girl besotted with a romantic fallen gentleman. Remind the world of who you are, Francesca." After her aunt's departure, Francesca found herself drawn to the rose garden, seeking solace in the beauty she and Edward had cultivated together. She found him there, carefully training a new climbing variety against the stone wall. "Your aunt seemed displeased," he observed quietly, having witnessed Lady Augusta's arrival and departure from a distance. "She brings news that our friendship has become a subject of gossip," Francesca replied, unable to meet his eyes. Apparently, a countess spending time with her gardener, regardless of his birth, is cause for scandal. Edward's hand stilled on the rose canes. "And does this concern you?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Francesca felt torn between the person she had been, guarded, proper, isolated, and the woman who had begun to emerge in Edward's company, more genuine, more alive. I have responsibilities, she said finally. To Havenswood, to my family name, to my position. And to yourself, he asked, his voice gentle but insistent. What do you owe to your own happiness, Francesca? She looked up then, meeting his gaze directly. I don't know any more. I've spent so long defining myself by what I must protect that I'm no longer certain who I am without those walls. Edward stepped closer, close enough that propriety demanded she step back, yet she remained still. I see you, he said simply. Not the Countess, not the guardian of Havenswood, but Francesca, a woman of courage and conviction who has denied herself the right to be truly known for fear of being truly hurt. The truth of his words pierced her like a physical pain. And what would you have me do? Disregard my position? Invite further scandal? I would have you make choices based on what you want, not what you fear, he answered. For too long, you've defined freedom as the absence of attachment. Perhaps true freedom lies in choosing attachment despite its risks. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and when she didn't, gently took her hand in his. The contact, simple as it was, sent awareness coursing through her. This was the first time they had touched beyond the accidental brush of fingers exchanging garden tools. I should prepare for the Harrington ball, she said, though she made no move to reclaim her hand. Aunt Augusta insists my attendance will quiet the rumors. Then you must go, Edward replied, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern across her knuckles. Show society the Countess they expect to see. But remember that I will be here, tending your gardens, waiting to see which Francesca returns. She withdrew her hand reluctantly and turned to leave, feeling as if she stood at a crossroads, each path leading to a different future, a different self. The Harrington ball was everything society demanded, lavish, exclusive, filled with the most influential families of the region. Francesca arrived dressed in a gown of deep blue silk that emphasized her regal bearing, her family jewels glittering at her throat. She played her role perfectly, engaging in conversation, dancing when appropriate, maintaining the precise degree of aristocratic reserve expected of her position. Yet she felt like an actress in a familiar play, reciting lines that no longer held meaning. The gossip, the social maneuvering, the hollow compliments, all seemed suddenly trivial compared to the authentic exchanges she had come to value with Edward. Even Lord Pembroke's renewed attentions, clearly encouraged by Lady Augusta, failed to engage her interest. You look magnificent tonight, Lady Ravencourt, Pembroke said, claiming her for a dance. Quite restored to your proper place in society. Was I ever absent from it? She replied coolly, allowing him to lead her through the steps of the quadrille. There have been concerns, he said, lowering his voice. Your unusual interests. Your choice of company. But I assured Lady Augusta that a woman of your breeding would never seriously entertain improper attachments. The condescension in his tone grated on her. How fortunate that I have such champions to defend my reputation, she said, not bothering to disguise her sarcasm. As the evening progressed, Francesca found herself near an open terrace door, seeking a moment's respite from the oppressive atmosphere of the ballroom. Two women stood nearby, their voices carrying clearly in the momentary lull of the music. The Countess certainly seems to have remembered her position, one commented. Lady Augusta mentioned she'd developed a concerning interest in her gardener, some fallen gentleman apparently. How deliciously scandalous, the other replied. Though one can hardly blame her. Maintaining the pretense of contentment in such isolation must be terribly difficult. Still, to seek companionship so far beneath her. I expect it was mere boredom, the first woman concluded. A passing fancy. She's too practical to risk her standing for something so inappropriate. After all, what could possibly come of such an attachment except disgrace? Francesca stood frozen, the women's casual dismissal of what had become precious to her striking with unexpected force. Was that how the world would always see her connection with Edward, as a bored aristocrat's inappropriate dalliance? Was that all it could ever be? Later that night, as her carriage returned her to Havenswood, Francesca gazed out at the moonlit landscape, her thoughts in turmoil. The gardens came into view, silver-washed in the moonlight, and she found herself searching the grounds, wondering if Edward might be there, perhaps unable to sleep, working by moonlight as he sometimes did. The estate was still, no figure moved among the shadowed paths, and Francesca felt a hollow ache at his absence. She had spent an entire evening surrounded by people of her class, yet felt more alone than in any quiet moment she had shared with Edward among her roses. The following morning brought rain, a steady downpour that matched Francesca's somber mood. She found herself drawn to the greenhouse, knowing Edward would likely be working there given the weather. Her aunt's warnings echoed in her mind as she made her way across the grounds under the shelter of an umbrella, yet she continued forward, driven by a need she could no longer deny. The greenhouse was warm and humid, filled with the earthy scent of growth. Edward stood at the far end, his attention focused on the experimental roses they had been cultivating together. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "How was the ball?" he asked simply. Francesca removed her damp outer garment, hanging it carefully on a hook near the door. Exactly as one would expect. Elegant. Proper. Hollow. She moved toward him, each step feeling significant. "I spent the entire evening playing the role everyone expects of me, the collected, untouchable countess. And all I could think about was being here, with you, speaking words that actually matter." Edward's restraint visibly wavered. "Francesca, no," she interrupted, suddenly decisive. "Let me finish. I've spent years building walls to protect myself from hurt, from vulnerability. I rejected every suitor because I believed their interest was only in what I possessed, never in who I am. Then you arrived, asking nothing, offering only your knowledge, your conversation, your perspective, and somehow, without my noticing, those walls began to crumble." She stood before him now, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, to notice the quickened rise and fall of his chest. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of what people will say, afraid of risking Havenswood's reputation, afraid of being hurt again. But I'm more afraid of returning to that emptiness, that half-life I was living before you showed me a different possibility." Edward reached out slowly, his fingertips brushing her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "What are you saying, Francesca?" "I'm saying that I don't know what path forward is possible for us. I only know that I cannot pretend indifference any longer. Whatever comes, whatever price must be paid, I choose this, I choose you." The words, once spoken, seemed to release something within her, a truth she had been fighting for weeks. Edward's expression transformed, joy breaking through his careful reserve like sunlight through storm clouds. He drew her to him then, one arm encircling her waist while his other hand cradled her face. "I have loved you since I first saw you walking alone through your gardens," he confessed. "Proud, beautiful, isolated. I recognized in you the same lonely determination I carried in myself. Two people who had chosen principle over connection, duty over joy." His lips found hers with gentle reverence that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more consuming. Francesca responded with all the passion she had denied for years, her arms encircling his neck, drawing him closer. The greenhouse around them faded, the rain pattering on the glass roof creating a private world where only this moment existed. When they finally parted, breathless and transformed, Edward rested his forehead against hers. "The world will not make this easy for us," he warned. "My disgrace, your position, there will be obstacles." Francesca smiled, feeling a lightness she had forgotten could exist. "We are both rather accomplished at defying expectations, are we not? Besides," she added with newfound conviction, "Havenswood has stood for centuries. It can withstand a little scandal." Their newfound understanding brought a period of secret joy. During the day, they maintained the appearance of countess and gardener, their interactions proper if slightly warmer than convention allowed. But in the evenings, they would meet in the greenhouse or the secluded corners of the garden, sharing conversations, confidences, and increasingly passionate embraces. Francesca bloomed under Edward's attentions, her natural warmth and wit emerging from beneath years of careful restraint. She began to envision a future where happiness might coexist with duty, where Havenswood could be not just a responsibility but a shared joy. Such dreams, however, were premature. Lord Harrington, still smarting from his earlier rejection and suspecting the growing attachment between Francesca and her gardener, set in motion a plan designed to separate them permanently. The blow fell on an autumn morning when Martha entered Francesca's study, her expression grave. "My lady, there's a solicitor here to see you. He says it's a matter of greatest urgency." The solicitor, a thin man with nervous hands, presented Francesca with legal documents challenging her management of Havenswood. Lord Harrington, with the support of several influential connections and her cousin Walter, had petitioned the courts to review the unusual conditions of her inheritance. The petition suggested that without male guidance, the estate was at risk of mismanagement, citing the irregular conduct of the Countess as evidence of potentially unsound judgment. "This is absurd," Francesca declared, her hands trembling with anger as she read the documents. "Havenswood prospers under my care. The accounts show increased profits each year. The challenge, my lady," the solicitor explained uncomfortably, "rests not on financial grounds but on moral considerations. The petition suggests that your behavior has become erratic, potentially damaging to the family name and heritage." "My behavior?" Francesca repeated incredulously. "What precisely is being questioned?" The man couldn't meet her eyes. "There are allegations of an inappropriate attachment to a servant. The suggestion is that such behavior indicates a disposition unsuited to maintaining the dignity of your position and properties." The implications were clear. Her growing relationship with Edward, though still largely private, had been observed, reported, and was now being weaponized against her. The law might protect her inheritance, but social scandal could create sufficient pressure for courts to consider intervention for the protection of the estate. After the solicitor departed, Francesca sought out Edward, finding him in their usual meeting place in the rose garden. The autumn light cast long shadows as she related the threat now facing them. "They cannot take Havenswood from you," Edward insisted, his expression dark with anger. "The legal grounds are flimsy at best. But the scandal they threaten could make my position untenable," Francesca replied. "If enough influential voices join against me, if the courts begin to entertain the notion that my judgment is compromised." Edward paced the garden path, his movements tense with contained fury. "This is my fault. My presence here has given them the weapon they sought." "No," Francesca said firmly, catching his hand to still his movement. "Do not take that guilt upon yourself. Harrington has sought to undermine me since I rejected his proposal 3 years ago. If not this, he would have found another pretext." "Nevertheless," Edward said, his voice hollow with resignation, "the solution is clear. I must leave Havenswood. My absence will remove their primary argument against you." The mere suggestion sent a physical pain through Francesca's chest. "No. I will not surrender what matters most because of their threats." Edward cupped her face in his hands, his expression grave. "Havenswood is your legacy, your responsibility. I will not be the cause of its loss." "And what of my heart?" she asked, tears threatening for the first time in years. "Would you have me sacrifice that to preserve stones and land?" "I would have you keep both," he said softly. "But if choice is forced upon us, I cannot allow you to lose everything you've worked to protect." "Not for me." That night, alone in her chambers, Francesca faced the darkest hour of her life. The thought of losing Edward, of returning to her isolated existence, felt unbearable. Yet the prospect of failing in her duty to Ravenswood, of being the Ravencourt who lost the ancestral home through scandal, was equally unthinkable. For the first time, she fully understood the trap that had been laid, her sense of duty used as a weapon against her chance at happiness. The choice presented was no choice at all: sacrifice love to maintain position, or sacrifice position for love. Either way, she would lose something essential to her identity. As dawn broke, Francesca rose from her sleepless vigil with a clarity that had eluded her through the long night. She would not accept the terms of this cruel choice. There must be another path, one that honored both her heart and her heritage. With new determination, she summoned her carriage and set out for London, leaving only a brief note for Edward asking for his trust and patience. The journey gave her time to formulate a plan, bold, perhaps even reckless, but preferable to passive surrender. In London, Francesca sought out an old family friend, Lord Thornfield, a respected judge with considerable influence. She laid before him the entire situation with unflinching honesty, including her feelings for Edward and the legal threat now being used against her. "This petition is a travesty," Lord Thornfield declared after reviewing the documents. "Using your personal attachments as grounds to challenge your management when the estate clearly prospers under your care. It reeks of personal vendetta. Can it be defeated?" Francesca asked directly. "In court, eventually, yes. But the process itself would subject you to public scrutiny and gossip that would be difficult to endure." Francesca straightened, her resolve strengthening. "Then I must change the narrative before it can take hold. Not by denying my feelings for Edward, but by transforming how they are perceived." From Lord Thornfield, she proceeded to the offices of the London Gazette, the very paper that had published the initial insinuations against her. There, she met with the editor, a man known for his love of dramatic social stories. "I wish to offer you an exclusive," she stated, her manner every inch the aristocrat despite her unconventional proposal. "The true story of the Countess of Ravenswood and Edward Valerian, son of the Earl of Mount Haven." Back at Ravenswood, Edward received Francesca's note with confusion and concern. Her sudden departure without explanation left him fearing she had chosen to distance herself from him to protect her inheritance. The days of her absence were a torment, each hour increasing his conviction that their brief happiness had come to its inevitable end. On the third day, a messenger arrived with a package addressed to him. Inside was a copy of the London Gazette, folded to display a prominent article titled "The Noble Gardener, a Modern Tale of Principle and Romance." The article detailed Edward's principled stand against his father, praising his moral courage in sacrificing privilege for justice. It presented his choice to work as a gardener not as a disgrace but as an honorable pursuit of meaningful labor. Most surprisingly, it openly acknowledged the growing attachment between the Countess of Ravenswood and this man of uncommon integrity, suggesting that such a union would represent not scandal but the finest traditions of aristocratic renewal through merit rather than mere birth. Accompanying the newspaper was a letter in Francesca's hand: "My dearest Edward, I refuse to be forced into an impossible choice by those who understand neither duty nor love. If scandal is their weapon, then I shall transform it into something they cannot use against us. Return to London with me. Face society not as my gardener but as the man you truly are, one who chose principle over privilege, honest work over hollow position. Together, we can redefine what honor means. I will arrive by tomorrow's evening coach. If you meet me, I will know your answer. If not, I will understand that you have chosen a different path, and I will respect your decision, though my heart will never recover from it. With all my love. Francesca. The following evening, as twilight descended over Havenswood, Francesca's carriage approached along the main drive. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest, her eyes straining through the gathering darkness for any sign of Edward. As the carriage neared the house, she saw only Martha waiting on the steps, her expression unreadable. Francesca felt hope draining away. He had not come. Perhaps her bold strategy had been too public, too presumptuous. Perhaps, despite everything, he had chosen to protect her by removing himself from her life. As she stepped down from the carriage, Martha curtsied. "Welcome home, my lady. You have a visitor waiting in the rose garden." Joy surged through Francesca with such force that she nearly stumbled. Without a word to her startled driver, she gathered her skirts and hurried toward the gardens, propriety forgotten in her urgency. The rose garden was lit with small lanterns placed along the paths, their gentle light illuminating the autumn blooms. In the center, beside the marble bench where they had spent so many hours in conversation, stood Edward. He was dressed not in his gardener's clothing but in the attire of a gentleman, his bearing reflecting his true background. "I thought perhaps you had decided against this path," Francesca said as she approached, her voice unsteady with emotion. Edward moved toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. "I considered it," he admitted. "I questioned whether I had the right to expose you to any risk, any judgment. Then I realized that making that decision for you would be its own kind of betrayal." He took her hands in his. "You chose to fight rather than surrender. How could I do less?" "It won't be easy," she warned. "Society may eventually accept us, but there will be those who never do. My cousin Walter is already threatening further legal action." Edward's smile held a touch of his old confidence. "Let him try. Lord Thornfield visited today, apparently at your request. He assures me that with the public narrative you've established, any legal challenge would appear as mere vindictiveness." "You've spoken with Lord Thornfield?" Francesca asked, surprised. "At length. He brought something else as well." Edward reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "This belonged to my mother. It's the one thing I kept when I left my father's house." He opened the box to reveal a ring of unusual design, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "It seems fitting, as we've been pursuing the impossible blue rose, that I should offer you this instead." Edward knelt before her, the lantern light catching the facets of the ring as he held it up. "Francesca Ravencourt, you have awakened in me a hope I thought lost forever. You have shown me that principles need not mean isolation, that strength can exist alongside vulnerability. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled freely down Francesca's cheeks as she looked down at this man who had transformed her understanding of both love and duty. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Edward. With all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to take her in his arms, Francesca felt the last of her protective walls dissolve, replaced by something stronger, the certainty that in opening herself to love, she had not weakened but strengthened both herself and her beloved Havenswood. Their kiss, witnessed only by the roses they had tended together, sealed a promise that would soon be formalized before society. But the true covenant had already been made in the quiet moments of shared understanding, in the gradual opening of two guarded hearts that had recognized in each other the possibility of a love worth every risk. The wedding of the Countess of Havenswood to Edward Valerian took place the following spring, when the gardens they both loved were in full bloom. Society gossip had largely subsided, replaced by romantic speculation about the nobleman who had chosen principle over privilege and the Countess who had recognized true worth beyond title. Lord Harrington and Walter Ravencourt were conspicuously absent from the celebration, their attempts to challenge Francesca's inheritance having been firmly dismissed by the courts, thanks in no small part to Lord Thornfield's influence and the public support generated by Francesca's strategic revelation of their story. As husband and wife walked among their guests in the gardens that had witnessed their unlikely beginning, Francesca paused beside a particular rose bush, one they had cultivated together through countless hours of patient work. "Look," she said softly, drawing Edward's attention to a single blossom just beginning to open. Its petals, touched with a hint of lavender that would deepen as it matured, showed the first true promise of the blue rose they had pursued together. "Not impossible after all," Edward observed, his arm tightening around her waist. "Merely waiting for the right hands to coax it into being." Francesca leaned into his embrace, surrounded by the beauty they had created together. "Like love," she agreed. "Not impossible, just requiring patience, courage, and the willingness to risk what seems safe for what is truly precious." The gardens of Havenswood would continue to evolve under their joint care, becoming renowned throughout England for innovative designs and rare specimens. But more remarkable to those who knew them well was the transformation of the Countess herself, no longer isolated by fear disguised as pride, but flourishing in a partnership of equals, her guarded heart now open to the joy she had once believed impossible.